Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode, his name is Diavolo, actually explains a bit about how Diavolo acquired his stand. It also explains what Polnareff was actually trying to explain to the Team Bucciarati this entire time, and it explains why they know each other. It also gives a little bit of backstory to some of the things that have happened throughout the rest of the series. So yeah, the episode opens up with Doppio trying to kill Bucciarati until Bucciarati remarks that regardless of what condition his body is in, that he needs to leave. And it's at this point where Doppio is curious about what exactly it is he's talking about, but then remembers that Bucciarati was supposed to meet someone, and realizing that he needs to actually figure it out on the boss's behalf, pointing out that the boss would be very interested to know who exactly it is he's supposed to be meeting with. He offers to actually take Bucciarati to wherever he needs to go, since it does kind of work as a double thing. Obviously Bucciarati can't really cross the street by himself because he's very badly injured, but also it serves double duty because Doppio, by walking Bucciarati where he needs to go, will be able to figure out who exactly it is he's meeting with. And of course, Bucciarati is a little confused as to why Doppio is still there, pointing out that he should have run along by now. But Doppio admits that he sees that Bucciarati is clearly in no shape, and wonders if he needs some help crossing the road. And of course, Bucciarati points out that he initially kind of rejects Doppio's offer, but then realizes that that's actually a good idea because obviously he can't cross the road himself. And then proceeds to tell Doppio that he's trying to go to the Colosseum, which Doppio winds up being a little bit confused by. But in any case, Bucciarati gets up and is prepared to get ready to cross the road, but then he trips over a guardrail and almost lands face first in front of a car, which Doppio pulls him to safety, but then notices that Bucciarati is unusually cold. And of course, Bucciarati then realizes that he ran into a guardrail and wonders if he hit it, and then also notices that he's missing a shoe and starts feeling around for it. And of course, it's at this point where Doppio starts questioning what exactly is happening to Bucciarati. Of course, Doppio wasn't really there for any of the things that have happened in any of the fights, but he understands that Bucciarati doesn't seem to be able to see very well. And also notes that he doesn't seem to be able to hear very well, considering he was almost hit by a car. And of course wonders what exactly it is that's going on with what's going on. But of course it's at this point where Doppio then proceeds to pick up Bucciarati's shoe and hand it back to him. At which point, strangely enough, despite not being able to see or hear, Bucciarati looks directly at Doppio and is not only able to see him and thank him for giving his shoe back, but also notes that he has a scar under his neck, even though Doppio admits that it's hidden under his turtleneck and there's no way Bucciarati should be able to see it. And of course, Doppio is very confused by all of this, since he points out that it was from several days ago when we fought Risotto, but doesn't fully understand how Bucciarati again should be able to see it, since obviously Bucciarati shouldn't be able to see it. It's under the collar on his turtleneck. He shouldn't be able to, but of course, it's at this point where Doppio realizes that it's better that he will have more than enough time to actually ponder this over, and then proceeds to drape Bucciarati over his shoulders and proceeds to walk him through the car. And to walk him through the car he walks him through the road across the road, but then notices that Misa is actually coming, having arrived at the Colosseum alongside presumably Giorno and the others. And quickly realizing that he took so long and he starts panicking and quickly realizes that he needs to hide himself in Bucciarati, since obviously they're going to know who he is, or at the very least they're going to blow his cover. And of course, he immediately hides Bucciarati, and Bucciarati is very insistent as to know why they're stopping. Obviously, he notes that shouldn't be safe, but that should be perfectly fine and just be a straight shot to the Colosseum. But Doppio, not wanting him to know that he saw Mista, lies and says that his neck wound has actually started flaring up, and that he needed to rest for a little bit. And of course, Bucciarati points out that he hopes he's okay, but then proceeds to pick himself back up and get ready to continue going onward toward the actual, toward the rest of he actually continued to go onward toward the Colosseum, but Doppio stops him, telling him that they're going to wait for a car to pass first, but Bucciarati notes that it's on the other side of the road where they've already crossed, and notes that it's probably safe, and it's at this point where once again, Bucciarati insists on crossing the road again, but of course, Doppio once again yells at him tells him not to, and then also contemplates killing him when he suddenly gets a quote unquote phone call from the boss, and of course, Doppio starts to panic from that because he quickly realizes that Bucciarati is going to figure out what's going on with him and that's going to blow his cover. And sure enough, Bucciarati notices that he's making the ringing noise himself, and then starts to wonder what exactly is up with Doppio. But it's at this point where Doppio then proceeds to open his bag, pulls out the phone in his bag. And then snaps at the boss, telling him not to call him because he's going to blow his cover. And of course, it's at this point where Bucciarati then looks at Doppio, but instead of seeing Doppio, he, for whatever reason, sees Trish. And it's at this point where the boss then proceeds to explain what exactly it is that's going on. And it's at this point, so the boss just kind of explains to Doppio what's going on with Bucciarati. That Bucciarati is essentially a walking corpse, and then proceeds to explain that he can't see very well, and also explains that because of his fight with Sekko, he can't hear very well. He can't hear anymore either. And then proceeds to explain that the way he's seeing is actually by seeing the souls of other people, and explains how and it does make sense considering Bucciarati is indeed a human soul piloting a walking corpse, but he does note that because of that he's able to see other people not necessarily as people, but as the souls of the vessel they reside. And sure enough, that's also why he wasn't able to see the cars and guardrails earlier. He can't see objects, but he can see the people in the cars. He can't necessarily see the cars as they're coming. That's the problem with that. But he does, and then he proceeds to explain why Bucciarati seems to think of him as Trish. And it's explained that the boss is actually letting out just enough of his spirit that Doppio is able to cloak himself from Bucciarati and not know who he is, and not really know who he is. So for that reason, Bucciarati isn't actually seeing Doppio; he's seeing Trish instead. And of course, this is this point where the boss then proceeds to coach Doppio over what he's supposed to do, and merely tells him to continue to pretend to be Trish to keep his cover from being blown. And sure enough, when Bucciarati starts talking to Trish, he wonders if she is safe, and wonders if everything is all right, and also wonders if she saw a little boy coming away. And Doppio, of course, lies by pretending to be Trish, and points out that he didn't see anybody run off. But also points out that it's not safe for him to be in the middle of the road, and Doppio then proceeds to continue to escort Bucciarati into the Colosseum while still pretending to be Trish. And of course, since Bucciarati can't see him either way, he thinks Trish is actually escorting him. Meanwhile, the real Trish has since emerged from the turtle, and of course, Giorno insists that she go back inside of Coco Jumbo, pointing out that it's not safe for her to be out and about since the danger could so very well be lurking. But she then proceeds to explain how she feels her father. She doesn't fully understand where he is, but she feels her father and knows he is nearby. And of course, this causes Giorno and Misa to panic a little bit, because they quickly realize that if he's here, that the person that they're looking for could very well be in danger, and they need to make haste to the Colosseum as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Bruno and Doppio have actually made it inside the Colosseum, and still thinking that Doppio is Trish, he then proceeds to explain to how he has a small house in Naples that she can stay at, if she doesn't have a space already, and that there's a good school and good restaurant nearby, and that when this is all over, she can have the apartment. Even though Tapio isn't actually Trish, he's not going to tell her any of this. He's just kind of nodding his head and being like, sure, we'll do that. But so yeah, Bucciarati is just kind of pouring his heart out to the fact that he wants to keep Trish safe and give her a new apartment and a new lease on life. But in actuality, he's telling all of this to Tapio, who doesn't really care either way. But in case they then proceed to arrive at the Colosseum, where the boss is still talking on the phone to Tapio, and the boss then proceeds to explain that Tapio shouldn't turn his head since they've arrived at the location and someone is watching them, and tells him not to look because he's obviously going to, if he sees his face, then his cover's going to be blown. And of course, sure enough, we do then hear Polnareff's voice, who then tells Bruno and Tapio to identify themselves, and of course the boss explains that Tapio should be able to see whoever it is in the reflection, and of course he sees Polnareff, but he's hiding behind a pillar and can't very well see him very well. And then also proceeds to remark that, and then they also just proceed to go on a bit of a back and forth, where of course Polnareff is very skeptical about who these newcomers are and wonders if they are actually the people he sent for, and Bruno insists that he is indeed who they sent for, and that he's come to learn the secret that Polnareff promised to show him, and if he's actually the person he said he is. And of course, Polnareff does recognize Bruno from his pictures and other things that he's got pulled up on his laptop, but then also notes that he doesn't really know who the other person he's with is, and of course it's this point where Bruno insists that it is in fact Trish, and points out that she is in fact a Stan user, and that they can trust her, and of course throughout all of this, Tapio is panicking because he has no idea what's going to happen. He has no idea if Polnareff is going to figure him out or not, and there are definitely a couple of close calls, since of course first and foremost, Bucciarati points out that Trish doesn't seem to be in the organization at all, and Bruno does indeed point that out, that he has no affiliation, that there is no affiliation with the organization. She's just someone who is in the wrong place at the wrong time, but and obviously her father is the leader of the organization, and that she's being hunted. But of course Polnareff then accepts that explanation, but then also notes that Trish seems like a girl's name, and that the person with Bucciarati doesn't seem to be a girl. At which point the boss tells Tapio to just insist that he is indeed a girl, and that if Polnareff has any problem with it. And of course, Tapio immediately says exactly that, and of course, Polnareff then proceeds to back off, pointing out that he obviously said something he shouldn't have. And of course, I'm pretty sure this is a trans joke about how it's obvious that it's not really a joke, but they do play it up as one, where it's obvious that Tapio is pretending to be Trish, and he very obviously doesn't look like Trish. So they play it up on the fact that that Trish might be trans, and that's kind of it. And there's a deeper meaning here, in that obviously Tapio is pretending to be Trish, and Polnareff obviously doesn't buy for a second. But it is kind of funny and a little bit interesting that he pretends to be trans to trick Polnareff, and it works. But of course, it's at this point where Polnareff then proceeds to insist that if she is indeed a Stan user, that he wants to see her stand. And of course, this winds up becoming a big problem, because obviously Tapio's quote unquote stand is King Crimson. Obviously, if Polnareff sees his stand, then it's going to blow his cover. And of course, Polnareff then proceeds to add that he only wants to see the stand from there, and that's obviously he's staying out of range of where it is, and points out as long as he sees the stand from there, he'll be satisfied. And of course, Tapio then proceeds to realize that whoever this guy is, he knows a lot about stands. And seems to point out that whoever this is clearly fought a couple of stands before and is taking range into account regarding stands. and of course it's at this point where Diavolo comes out a little bit more, and then notices the stand arrow sitting on Polnareff's lap, and it's at this point where his aura then proceeds to flare up, and of course Polnareff quickly notices that, noting that it's like somebody is shooting daggers into his heart. And then he quickly realizes that he recognizes this aura from somewhere, and then quickly notices that the person that's actually with Bruno is in fact the boss, who then proceeds to disappear and reappear closer to Polnareff, and it's at this point where the two of them then proceed to go into a bit of a flashback with one another, where it is revealed how Polnareff actually wound up losing his legs and eye. And it also explains a little bit about how Diavolo gained his stand as well. As we find out, Diavolo was actually a member of an Egyptian excavation team, and he wound up finding the stand arrows at one point. He goes on to explain how, even though he didn't really know what they were, he explains that they clearly held some sort of immense power, and what we find out is they actually wound up selling it to Enya the Hag, who, if you guys remember, was Dio's main informant for part 3 up until she died, but it does kind of explain how Dio, and by extension several members of his army, did wind up acquiring their stands. Because Diavolo then proceeds to go on to explain how he sold them to her, and she did agree to buy them on the grounds that she showed him how they work, and also explains how they do indeed hold tremendous power. And of course, presumably from there, he just unlocked his stand that way. And he did keep one. He openly admits he did wind up keeping one, specifically to use in the organization to awaken more stand users, which we did actually see a little bit. The one that he bought was used by Black Sabbath to create more stand users, and it's gone now. Giorno destroyed that a long time ago, alongside just killing Pulpo, but yeah, he used it, but yeah, we do find out that does explain how Pulpo wound up getting his stand arrow. It explains how Diavolo bought one and found one. He gave it to Pulpo to make more stand users, and he sold the rest to Enya, who presumably used them to create the world and a couple of other stands, and also just kind of sold them and scattered them throughout the world. We don't really learn much about that, but in any case, around the same time in the 90s. Which was only a couple of years ago in context. This series takes place in 2001. The last one took place in 1999. So it kind of gives context to why Jotaro was just kind of in Morio for looking for stand arrows. But it explained that around the same time, Polnareff and Jotaro met up. They found out that Enya had sold a bunch of stand arrows to a bunch of different people scattered across the globe. So the two of them decide to split up, though they admit that they do decide to keep in touch, and they decide to go off to different corners of the world to go and find the stand arrows. Jotaro went to both Japan and America, and that one will become relevant later. Whereas Polnareff actually winds up going off to Asia and Africa. And during his journey, he eventually winds up in Italy, where he learned about how the crime rate in Italy seems to have been soaring a lot, and he notes that that's unusual, that the drug rate is unusually high in Italy. So he decides to go and investigate, and starts investigating the boss's organization. And sure enough, what he did find out is that there was an unusually high amount of stand users within the area, and started using Silver Cherry to just kind of cut his way through the organization and find out who the leader of the organization is, so he could take the stand arrow away from him. And the boss eventually figured out that he was being tracked, and approaches him as Diavolo, where he then proceeded to eventually corner Polnareff on a cliff, and though it quickly becomes apparent that Silver Cherry is very outmatched by King Crimson, and Polnareff notes this in their very brief fight with one another in the flashback. He does quickly note that he's outmatched, but then Diavolo makes a mistake, in that he does wind up incapacitating Polnareff to the point where he's unable to really fight anymore. But But of course, he doesn't realize that he didn't actually kill Polnareff. He knocks him off the. He does knock him off the cliff. Does eventually cut off his arm and legs and injure his eye. But Polnareff winds up landing safely on a rock below the cliff. And Diavolo, presuming that Polnareff had indeed perished and fallen into the ocean, walks off and goes about his merry way, unaware that Polnareff is still very much alive and it has come back to bite him in the ass. So. Yeah, and for that reason, they quickly realize that the two of them have since tracked each other down, and it quickly becomes apparent that the two have a bit of beef to settle with each other. Obviously, Diavolo quickly realizes that he needs to deal with Polnareff before he reveals what exactly it is he's doing with the stand arrow, and reveals what it actually does. Well, Polnareff has since quickly realized that Doppio and Diavolo are one and the same, and has since realized that Doppio needs to stay right there so that he not move. But of course, that doesn't wind up working, and of course, Doppio then proceeds to, as I said, disappear. And of course, Polnareff then proceeds to start panicking and not really know where he is. And sure enough, Doppio then proceeds to walk up the stairs and approach Polnareff. And in the process, the boss then proceeds to come out within erased time. And within erased time, he also proceeds to gloat Polnareff, pointing out that this is a test to see if his resolve is stronger than Polnareff's. And in the process, whips off Doppio's sweater. And we finally see who he is. We have not seen him yet. I should mention that. We've only seen glimpses of him. This is the first time we've actually seen Diavolo in the flesh. This is the first time we've actually seen him. But obviously, since Polnareff already knows what his identity is, obviously the Diavolo isn't going to hide himself. But of course, it's at this point where obviously Polnareff then proceeds to panic a little bit. Obviously, since he already realized a while that by this point that of course the boss hasn't since arrived and has come to finish him off. But also notes that he doesn't really know how to fight off against Diavolo, and he starts panicking because he knows he's not going to be able to win against Diavolo again. But Diavolo then proceeds to approach him, and then also wonders why Polnareff is refusing to fight. And summarizes that it's either the fact that he's lost the ability to actually fight back against him, or more specifically, he's unable to because he's now crippled. But and of course, as Diavolo is saying this, Polnareff bites his lip and starts dripping blood on himself. Of course, it seemed like he's panicking a little bit. But then, as it turns out, there was actually a practical reason for that. It's at this point where he then points out that he's now going to correct the mistakes of his past and is not going to let his past self be the death of him. So he then proceeds to use King Crimson to erase time. But in the process, this enables Polnareff to quickly find out where he is. As it turns out, biting his lip actually wound up serving as a countermeasure to King Crimson's time erasure, because obviously, Polnareff is dripping blood on himself. He's able to see the droplets, and when he notices that there's more of them, he's able to figure out that Diavolo has moved behind him and is able to attack him with Silver Chariot, which of course Diavolo does comment on. Very much pointing out that now Polnareff has figured out how to fight him, and it does point out for the first time somebody has actually managed to injure him in a fight. Which of course he doesn't fare particularly kind against, but points out that that even though Polnareff has managed to injure him, this is going to change nothing, and also points out that this was something that he's been trying to do for a while, and he knew Polnareff was going. That he knew at one point something was going to come back to bite him, and he points out that he doesn't that if he can defeat Polnareff before he reveals the secret of the stand arrow, he'll be able to be in the clear and be able to finally defeat Team Bucciarati, because they're no longer going to have a sense of direction. And but of course Polnareff insists that he's not going to let Diavolo get the arrow back. And then proceeds to have Silver Chariot chuck him into the air, which of course he points out is a very clever tactic, but he's not going to get away. And it's at this point where Polnareff does wind up landing back where he was, but and Diavolo then goes in to finish him, pointing out that he's finished, but then notes that something strange is happening with Silver Chariot. As we find out, Silver Chariot actually wound up being pierced by the arrow, and at this point it starts to melt and warp and a whole bunch of other things, and then proceeds to scatter off deeper into the Colosseum. And Polnareff points out that this was actually a last-ditch effort to keep the arrow safe from Diavolo, pointing out that he knew he wasn't going to win in a fight, and that's the only real way he's going to be able to defend himself. And of course, Diavolo points out that was a very strange thing he did, and notes that the arrow does seem to do more than just bring out stand abilities, but also points out that it was completely pointless, and that regardless of what tactic he uses, he's going to wind up defeating Polnareff. And sure enough, he then proceeds to punch him through the stomach and kills him. And Polnareff, remembering the fond moments he had with his friends back in part 3, then passes away and points out that he hopes he will be able to have bought the Team Bucciarati some time. And of course, it's at this point where Diavolo points out that he died, but points out that it wasn't in vain since he did wind up getting the arrow back, and does point out that Polnareff at the very least did wind up serving a purpose for him. Meanwhile, throughout all of this, the rest of Team Bucciarati have noted that time is skipping, and quickly realizing that that whoever it is the boss is fighting is within his range. They quickly realize that they need to get to their informant before they get to him, and proceed to run up the rest of the Colosseum. And sure enough, they note that Bucciarati is on the floor, injured, and doesn't seem like he's moving very well. And Diavolo, he quickly realizes he needs to hide because this is the exact opposite of what he wanted to see. But then he sees a strange set of footsteps echoing from the deeper within the Colosseum, and he turns around to discover a stand. And it's unclear what the stand is, but it's clearly but from what we can tell, it has a mark where it got hit with the arrow, and has an obvious arrow-shaped indentation on its neck. But we don't know what it is. But it's implied to be connected to what Polnareff did with Silver Chariot. It's shown that Silver Chariot clearly melted and something happened, but it's unclear what happened. It's unclear what actually transpired as a result of that. We don't know what happened, but clearly it was something that caused Diavolo to panic, because he quickly realizes that it somehow snuck up behind him, and he has no idea where it came from. But yeah, in any case, this episode is a very lore-heavy one. I just will mention it brings up what exactly happened to Polnareff all this time ago, and it does explain that he has indeed been in touch with Jotaro and did try to help him find stand arrows, and that's how he lost his arm, his legs, and one of his eyes. But of course, Diavolo, despite his best efforts, was unable to actually defeat Polnareff, or at least he did kill Polnareff, but something clearly has happened to his stand, and it's unclear what happened to it. It is clearly Silver Chariot, but something has happened to it. It's unclear what, but yeah, I am interested to know what exactly is going on here, because obviously we've established that the bow and arrow, it's already been established to be able to not only grant stands, but grant new abilities. And we do know that the arrow has in fact granted new abilities to stands in the past. It gave Yoshikage Kira the ability to jump through time by creating his third bomb. And clearly that seems to be an extension of this. I have no idea what's going on, but clearly it seems like whatever happened, it has indeed caused Polnareff's stand to evolve a little bit more. So I don't know. I'm interested to see where this is going to go. But for the time being, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. I post updates over there, so if you guys absolutely want to go check those out, by all means, link is down in the description and over on the... And also, speaking of which, also in the description is my Patreon. I mainly use it to finance projects, so if you want to absolutely see that over there, by all means, go check that out over there. And also, it's also on the end screen. And speaking of the end screen, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. What is above video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!